Hey everyone, welcome back to the Heroes World Quarantine Podcast. How you doing? This is kind of a special podcast we're going to drop really from a retailer's corner. And I thought that with John and Andre being retail owners of a comics bookstore for over 20 years, they'd be the excellent minds to pick about the whole situation with DC layoffs. And Rob is here because he knows a lot about, he's a DC fanboy, so it does affect him in his life. So it's going to be a quick conversation. As some people know already, it's been almost a few days since Warner Media and DC have collectively laid off 600 people from at Warner Media, and this affects a lot of people, from the president to the creative teams to reorg. Jim Lee is no longer full powered. They relieved his executive assistant. They've done total shakeup of the organization. Outside of that, it's going to affect media. But I wanted to get John and Andre's thoughts on how it affects the brick and mortar. So those of us who love comic books, physical comic books, what that means for us. So quickly, as I'll give you some context, the last few months, DC made a decision to stop go through Diamond distribution. So now they're in control of what they distribute, and they've moved that. With this whole layoff, they're also potentially getting rid of the DC Collectibles line. So there's lots of rumors that DC is moving more towards digital and more towards trade paperbacks, because that's where they make a lot of their money. So Andre, give us your general thoughts. How does that affect you guys? Is there concern that maybe as they move forward to only doing trades, because that's what they make money, is it going to be too much on the trades and variant covers? Like, what does that mean for you guys? Or maybe does it mean there's less comics? Because again, they went for 52, which was a lot, and now they're decreasing the amount of books. So how does that kind of affect you guys as a retailer?
So I think there's like a lot of pieces at work. A lot of gears are turning, and a lot of things were set in motion with this. So yeah, the layoffs were pretty substantial. I think it was about 20% of their staff across Warner Media. It wasn't just DC, but DC got hit hard with a lot of editors, senior editors leaving, and that has a ripple effect because they take the people with them. DC's also, I think, shutting down, or not shutting down, canceling about 25% of their comic book line. So that's definitely going to have an impact on the number of books people can purchase, and thus the number of books that a store can carry. However, I'm sure some of this was in the works before. Listen, comics as a physical medium, just like any print medium, has been taking a shit kick over the past several years. It's extremely hard to make money and have the numbers that you need in order to consistently print books. And I think DC, and I'm sure a lot of the other comic companies, are in the position of they are printing single issues at a loss to hope they can make that money back up when a trade paperback comes, or if something gets optioned for television, movies, or some type of digital other form. So with over the past 5-6 years, we've seen, after the New 52, they said, hey, we're going to reboot our line, and any product that does not consistently sell will get cut. And that, I think, was the right thing to do. People have to put their money where their mouth is. If you want a Sergeant Rock comic, you have to buy that Sergeant Rock comic. Don't just talk about it. And not enough people bought Sergeant Rock, so they cut that title. Voodoo got her own title. Not enough people bought that title, got cut. DC, a couple years after, into Rebirth, stabilized their line, but there is a lot of Bat books, Superman books, and Justice League books. So they're constantly trying to stabilize their line. I think what has happened, though, with DC was that they went with this kind of shotgun approach in which they have many different lines. They had like the young adult line. They have this the Black Label line. They have the regular DC line. Then they have these tween lines. So I think what happens is they're looking at these lines and saying, okay, they're not consistently generating money. We need to make cuts. Oh, look, there's a pandemic. There's all the shortages. There's all the shipping errors. There's this time to make a change. also we have to keep in mind that DC's biggest competitor is Marvel Comics, and Marvel runs a very different ship than DC, which already has less editorial staff and less people. So I think right now this has just been a let's reorganize the ship and see if we can get it sailing faster. What that means from what they are, telling us, I don't believe the trade paperback story. Trade paperbacks, the industry can't move to just trade paperbacks. It can't. They don't make enough money, and creators are, sorry, I'm not throwing any creator under the bus, but some things take a long time. So if you have a book supposed to come out and then it doesn't come out because creator A, B, C, or D has been late, like look at DC did that
Jeff Johns.
Jeff Johns. That year one lineup, right? Then they got to Batman year one, number 1 and 2. I think Superman got up to 3, but we haven't seen that. And those books were supposed to come out yearly.
The Earth one or year one?
The Earth one. Remember the
Earth one,
yeah, the Earth one, sorry. So I think that's a pipe dream. Everybody's saying, oh, comics are going to go that way. And we got to remember, if comics do go that way, you're not going to be looking at a $16.99 Canadian retail for an original graphic novel content. You're going to be paying substantially more, because why are trade paperbacks $16 to $20, $25, $30, whatever? Because the floppies have already paid for that book. Now they're just making money. There's no ads. Ads have done that, right? So they might be thinking to streamline what they produce, but it's not going to be like, oh, we're not producing floppies, we're going to go just trade paperbacks. I think them thinning their line is going to help. It's going to hurt us in the short term, but if the books become better and they are fitting an audience demand, then that could only lead to more sales. One of the things that I read about that I was a little bit concerned with was the 2 big editorial shifts. They brought their person from the young adult line, I can't remember, it's like their
Young Animal, I think.
Young Animals line, sorry, the Young Animals line, and somebody, and I can't remember the other person, but there's 2 different lines, and now they are kind of the editor-in-chief with Jim Lee about what they're going to bring out. So maybe they're looking for this whole new vision and stuff to see, but that's where my concern is, because I'm a big comic book fan. I'm a big classic comic book fan and stuff. I love where comics are at right now. I think we've got some of the best written comics right now and the best drawn comics. But I do think that comics are facing an identity crisis in that they do not know how to reach the audience that they want. They already have the Andres, the Johns, the Robs. We grew up on this stuff. It's trying to reach a new generation of kids and have them stick to reading comics. And I think that's the challenge that DC is maybe trying to do and trying to work towards. So if they can nail that, that's going to help us. Short term, yeah, it'll probably be a little bit, kind of like I said, less titles for us mean less sales. But the titles that they canceled, if we weren't moving the big numbers of those anyways, that's the reason.
It wasn't surprising. The list, he'd be like, I'm not surprised that's gone.
So I hope that it is stronger. One of the shocks was like that they canceled Black Label, and that's the line that's been making the money. But I said this at the beginning. I think Black Label started at this really clear concept, and then they opened the floodgate and just started naming everything Black Label, and that basically Black Label basically began to mean superheroes and Vertigo and this and that, and some large format and some, and it was like they didn't know what that was. So if canceling it then lets them restream and say, oh yeah, we're gonna do a 4 grown-up comic that may include more violence or more mature content, like some of these stories with the Joker and Harley Quinn that you don't want a young reader reading, then that's cool. But they have to rebrand that. They have to refocus that. So it's not just this catch-all. But I will say why I am positive for the future for DC is, like, even though they're behind in Marvel, DC has always been a place to make changes and then come back. So it might hurt now, and it sucks that all these people lost jobs and stuff, but right now where the world is, every business, sorry, let me not say every business, but a lot of businesses have had to lay off staff and have to make changes and streamline to try and survive. And if they can survive and get to thriving, who knows, maybe 4 or 5 years down the road, they start building back up their stable, or they just become a more focused machine, and they're just putting out content like that is going to be even more well received like never before.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, Andre, I don't know if they've canceled the Black Label. I think that the editor who was a driving force behind that is gone, but I still think that that the Black Label still will remain intact. I mean, they're touting 300,000 copies of Three Jokers #1 under the Black Label, and I think they've released some solicits. You would know better, but I was just taking a look. I thought Black Label was still going to be around, but they were just going to try to.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, so maybe, but the editor's gone.
Yeah, the editor's gone.
That's something scary, right?
Why would you get rid of the editor of your most popular line? Because maybe after Three Jokers, maybe come 2021, we're not going to see that Black Label logo on everything, and they slap that on everything. The new
that might be the problem
line. They slap that on all their titles, and I'm like, okay, how is this now Black Label? And I feel that they were unfortunately misusing that, because all of a sudden then anybody who said on their pull and hold list, give me all Black Label, that became a big section of their of DC's books, instead of, you know, the Sandman book being its own. Like, again, you closed Vertigo, created these other lines, and then you start putting anything that was for adults under Black Label. And again, you've put now Three Jokers. Why is Three Jokers technically to be under Black Label? So they can charge more money, you know? Or the Batman Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo run, that was under Black Label. That was a book that any Batman fan could have read, right? So we'll see where they come out. Yeah, you're probably right. Maybe they're not canceling that line, but the editors are gone, and that's going to.
So quickly, to your point, Vertigo, they cut that tie a little while ago. Do you want to tell the people at home why that was the case? Because I know people will have some Vertigo books, Fables being one of them. Why did you, like, some of us know and some of us don't, but do you want to let the uninitiated know why they cut ties with Vertigo?
For Vertigo, like that happened several years ago. I can't even remember what their particular reason was for killing that line. I know the editor just ran the ship for a long time, and I don't know if there was.
It's so intellectual property ownership. So if you did with Vertigo, you own the IP still. So DC didn't own it flat out.
Their version of Image.
So their version of Image was like, okay, you can do it, but you can sell it under DC. We'll make money, but you keep the IP. But now everything's moving over. So.
Yeah, that was but you got it. You have to put the caveat that under Vertigo, even though the creative team retained ownership, Warner Brothers had first right of refusal for any of their projects. So if you're I want to make a movie based on my product, then Vertigo, and it was unpublished under Vertigo, Warner Brothers could say, okay, let's see, we get to say no first before. And I guess after that was the case, once they shuttered it, they didn't want to share that. And honestly, that's a tough pill to swallow. It sucked that they had to close Vertigo down, because Vertigo was a great
originator.
Everyone just moved to Image, and to be fair, Image is
we kind of
surviving.
saw it coming. It had kind of dropped off in the sales for those types of books, and the creators that were showing up for those weren't as hot as Image and some of the other companies were getting. So it wasn't a surprise that happened.
So quick jump point to you, John, with DC's the collectibles line. Can you talk a little bit about what that means for you guys in terms of what that, the merchandising of?
Yeah, so the DC stuff? Collectibles, aka DC Direct, was a line that was exclusive to us retailers. So and it had a lot of like fun stuff. Like they did a lot of action figures. A lot of them were deep cuts that you wouldn't see in a popularized line. And they had a lot of like statues and stuff. Like Rob can probably talk about it. Like the Batman Black and White line. Even just their regular size statues were all coming in at a very quote unquote affordable price compared to Sideshow and some of the other stuff they're licensing out, which is that Superman statue is maybe around 150 to 200 ish, whereas a Sideshow equivalent would be around 600, 800 ish. So they kind of like had a nice kind of line going. Look at Rob's flying around his
I'm
Superman
just gonna
statue,
put
but
it back where it was.
Yeah, for those who don't know, listening at home,
in
Rob
Rob's
almost
background,
dropped his $200 statue. You know?
Jesus Christ. But Rob has like we had a lot of customers who would collect these on a regular basis, and that kind of hurts. But on the flip side, the DC Direct toy line, as a toy collector and as following the toy trends and stuff like that, it has never been a highly desired line. So we would bring a couple figures of that in, but you know, Hasbro's Marvel Legends line, or even a lot of the Japanese manufacturers are jumping in, and everyone's going crazy for those. The new Mayfax Superman and Batman Hush figures are very highly desired. They are expensive. They're around the $100 price point, but they are more desired than DC's current line, and maybe they weren't putting enough money into it to develop the technology that some of these other companies have. So maybe the market wasn't as like, even though we carried it, even though it was exclusive to us, we would carry more of the other lines. So that's the kind of flip side of it.
So question for you, John, because the retail sector is now turned into, you know, super cheap that you're buying overseas from these, you know, Asian websites to super high end. Was DC Direct too much in the middle ground? And from now on, people are like, either I'm buying Sideshow or buying cheap toys. Like, it's one or the other. Is that where
maybe that market is not as big as it was before? Because I think they did mention in the article that I saw that they were talking with Jim Lee that they were considering focusing on a higher price point and the idea of licensing. So maybe that's it. But it was, like, I'm sure Rob can speak on it, that it was nice to be able to get, you know, a Batman statue for less than 100, less than $80, and pick the ones that are from, you know, comic creators and artists that you follow in the comics, right? Not just Todd McFarlane, or not just like someone who's running their own company type thing.
Yeah, I will say that I think one of the things is that as somebody like John keeps up with the trends, and he orders all the figures and stuff for the store. But the nice thing about the DC Direct line was that you could get action figures based on your favorite comic book, and they were drawn by that creator. But you have to remember what that entails. DC was shouldering all of that themselves. They had to get the designers, the manufacturing, the shipping, the packaging, the warehousing, all of that. And guess who was carrying these figures? Only independent retail stores, and very few. There was no big box store that you could walk into. So the numbers were kind of low. And also, as independent retailers, we could buy exactly what we wanted. If we only wanted 2 Batman figures but 8 Cheetah figures or Wonder Woman, we weren't on the victims of having to buy by a case. So this was very good for comic book stores and independent retailers. But you have to then remember, DC's a business, and if it was costing them too much money to service maybe the 3,000 to 5,000 comic book stores worldwide, and never getting into a Walmart, a Toys R Us, a Target, or any of these big chains, there comes a certain point when they could say, hey, hold on a second, we're licensing our characters to Mattel, and Mattel is paying us for that, and they're putting them in Toys R Us that everybody can get to them, and they're putting them in Target, and they're putting them in Walmarts. So we saw a great deal happen last year with McFarlane Toys doing DC figures, and everyone's like, holy crap, this is kind of huge. But now that makes a little bit more sense. So I think DC's probably been had this in the works. The McFarlane figures have been great, and we're getting different designs based on actual comic books. Like we just
like Curse of the White Knight.
Curse of the White Knight.
We are getting like unique
fantastic
stuff.
Fantastic. So they're still, I think, going to do that. But also on the statue front, again, I think licensing is the name of the game. You have vendors or manufacturers like Kotobukiya doing vinyl statues for a reasonable price. Then you have, is it called Iron Studios, John, doing a smaller one?
Yep.
Then you have,
Prime One,
Sideshow,
like
Prime One, and then XM. So again, it sucks to lose that line, but we're not going to have a shortage of product. And again, if this could make the ship sale better. Like, remember Marvel had Toy Biz and they got rid of Toy Biz, and Marvel had Skybox to publish cards because they thought this was the thing. And Marvel almost went bankrupt, and they're like, oh God, we got to sell off this stuff. We got to do all this stuff. So the figure part, you know, for us, it's sad because we love the line, but I do feel that we're still going to see great merch from DC and such still.
Okay, that's
I like to hear from
insight.
Rob because he's the consumer of these things that we would carry. If how he feels about these statue
there's a
lines
lot
discontinuing.
So you know what? The problem is, Andre and John, but Andre just eloquently said, "Hey guys, you don't have anything to worry about. They're still going to get statues from other licensors, right? Like Kotobukiya and everybody else we just mentioned." But that really hasn't been made clear to the consumer like myself, right? So you read these articles because if anybody wants to go on, just Google the DC, what they call the DC Bloodbath that just happened, and there's lots. There's a Hollywood Reporter issue with Jim Lee, story with Jim Lee, and he talks about DC Direct, and that, as John said, they're looking at doing higher price points for things. So listen, I am an average dude. I got a wife, 2 kids, I got a dog, I got a house, I have bills to pay. I only have a certain amount of money. I am not one of those individuals who has an accepting wife to say, hey, go ahead and throw $2,000 down on a giant statue from Sideshow or Prime One. I don't have that. But I can get, right behind me, you probably can't see it, I have a whole case full of Batman black and white statues and whatnot. And as you know, I almost broke the Superman Jim Lee statue, but I got a few of the DC Direct, their statues from their comic lines. Like, they're affordable to me. I don't need to have 10,000 of them. I can have nice ones. You can, you can trade them. You can do whatever. They're affordable and they're nice, and they complement anybody's collection. You can even have 1 or 2. It doesn't make a difference because they're cool and they're fun to have. And so it does concern me that I am now going to start looking at a higher price point, and maybe a statue that's $250 to $450 isn't that big of a deal for some of you at home, but for some of us, it could be, because that money is allocated to dance lessons and soccer and everything else for your kids, right? So that's where it concerns me a little bit. It concerns me as a consumer to see that DC is pushing a little bit more on these digital comics. I think that we didn't benefit, I guess for lack of a better, that's probably a poor term, but we didn't benefit from the Walmart deal that our friends in the US had, in terms of DC were releasing these oversized comics at Walmart. So we didn't have that up here. But it seems like they want to use that model to start distributing some of their books in the US. And I don't understand, and then go digital and then put a collected edition of all the digital, which is how I think Injustice originally started off.
Yeah, Injustice
first,
digital
right?
only. The new Injustice Tom Taylor.
So I don't understand, I get what Andre is saying, and I agree, slash a number of these titles that aren't making money. It doesn't make sense to have these lost leaders to continue putting out books that aren't making any money. I get it. But I also don't want the market flooded with 900 Batman titles, because Batman pulls in cash as well, right? I want a little bit of variety, but I want there to be accessible. I want to be able to go to the store or have you guys, mail them out to me, in this pandemic. I don't want to be like, well, sorry, we don't have them because DC's not making them available to us. And it just is a bit of a concern from a consumer's perspective. Where am I going to get my books and how am I going to get it? And if you really want to go a deep dive, there's a lot of people online, and John had posted a clip about this, about DC almost undercutting or underselling a lot of these big books that are coming out right now with this Joker War. And it's not available to a lot of consumers because they're screwing things over in how they're shipping stuff. So it feels not fun to be a DC fan when it comes to the physical medium of either the books or the statues right now. And that's a bit concerning.
So let me read this quote and get John and Andre's thoughts, because again, time is of an issue and we don't have all day. So I just get your thoughts quickly. This is from Screen Rant. The quote goes, simply put, Warner Media doesn't want to be in the comic business. It wants to be in the character business. Another source with knowledge of Warner Brother operations tell me the same source contends that the company may no longer want DC and its comics to be the driving force behind entities that are so important to WB franchising and licensing goals. Moving forwards, both sources believe comics will be a small part of a necessary intellectual property maintenance needed to keep the corporate cash cows like Batman and Wonder Woman and Superman humming along. So typically, DC and Marvel has their comic division that kind of go on their own. And this would kind of say that, going forward, so if Kevin Feige decides, I want this direction, it would kind of go all the way down. And maybe with DC, the same thing would happen. I want Batman to be this, so that would even affect the comics themselves. So what are your thoughts generally saying that going forward, there might be the one leader of all of DC will be able to decide comic books, TV, and comics all being one direction, one look, one feel? How does that kind of affect you guys in the story and whatnot? Does that help? Does that make it worse? Are you concerned that maybe there'll be less interesting storylines? Because if they say you can't do this, then we'll not get interesting comic book stories anymore with Batman or weird things with, characters.
I think Andre's going to have a better view of that, but I'll just jump in quickly that the fact that I guess if it means that they'll actually like push their comic line or actually care about their comic line, because right now it feels like the movie airs and they don't even mention it, like not even a glimpse of a comic at the beginning of the credits or end credits or go buy a comic or whatever. Like if that means they will actually say, hey, now go buy the comic, or this is based off a comic or whatever, I feel like that could be a good thing. That could definitely help. I'm sure Andre has better thoughts on it.
I think the quote was rightfully anonymous because let's face it, that's what every company wants. When you buy another company, you're buying it for the intellectual property and you want to make money off of that. And they're not people who bought it because they love comics. It's people that bought it because they love money and profits. So at the end of the day, you're going to look at those characters that can generate you money and profit and influence, and those IPs that can be, merchandised to hell and make them just money. And you want the people who can create and continue to create those, but you're maybe not looking at the creativity that has gone into those characters and the people who make the characters hum and move along and evolve. So I do believe whoever spoke those quotes was speaking truthfully. Mm-hmm. I don't believe that they want to simply not publish comics, because it's one thing to own those IPs, but if you're just going to license somebody else to publish those comics, that's a whole nother entity, because those people could misconstrue your image of a Batman, Superman, or Wonder Woman. You own those, you control that. I think, again, as a longtime comic fan, I don't want to see the comics, the movies, the video games all being streamlined and one version of the characters. However, I would love to see, like John said, I would love to see more emphasis placed on the original source material and acknowledgement of the original source material. If I'm playing the new iteration of, is it Rocksteady doing the new
Suicide Squad?
Yeah.
I want to see, before the credits of that game, I don't want to see the Rocksteady logo. I want to see the DC logo come up based on the Suicide Squad comic book published by DC Comics, going today or still available at, and then they could have DC's website. There needs to be more acknowledgement of that so people know where these guys are coming from. And if you want more of that particular idea or that particular movie or that particular game characters, that you can find more in a trade paperback, in a comic book, whatever, a t-shirt, an action figure, those things exist. I think they need to definitely push more of that. And I think they could stand to, maybe, I don't want to use the word diversify the line, but maybe if they were really that concerned, you could possibly have DC Universe and then, DC like animated. Remember there was a time where we had Batman the Animated Series comics and Justice League Unlimited comics. Mm-hmm. We know those were not the main universe, and people could buy those if that's what they liked. Maybe they could benefit from something like that. But there is a huge disconnect in the number of people who consume the movies and then go out and buy them or subscribe to like the DC online thing, yet they don't touch a comic book. And I think that's the piece of the puzzle they solve. because everybody who potentially watches a movie, reads, watches a TV show, they're a superhero fan. So you should be able to figure a way to get them, A, to pick up a comic or a trade paperback, or B, get them to at least enter a comic book store, right? So that's what they have to figure out. I hope that they realize that if they find that piece, that cog, that gear that will turn and get people to stores, that means more money for them, because we will then buy more comics to sell more. If they don't drive people to us, there's only so much an independent small store can do by itself to bring people in, right? So I've said this numerous times. At the beginning of every superhero movie, there should be a 3-minute or 2-minute quick documentary talking about, hey, this is this character created by this person, and here's what's currently going on in that comic book series, and here's the number for the comic shop locator. Done.
Throw us a bone.
You've just literally informed everybody that comics exist, and you've driven them to our stores. The other thing I will say is we are in an unprecedented time for the number of celebrities playing superhero characters and the number of celebrities who actually still legit love comics, okay? How hard would it be to be on set and you've got my man Cumberbatch in his Doctor Strange uniform? Hey, buddy, can you hold up this Doctor Strange comic and say, hey, I'm Benedict Cumberbatch. I play Doctor Strange. Did you know you could follow my adventures monthly in Marvel Comics? Hell, they don't even have to hold up a comic. Green screen it, so every month you could change that. You've got these celebrities going to Make-A-Wish Foundation dressed as their characters. Use them to sell comic books. Advertisements. Celebrities endorse everything from cars to steaks to fast food restaurants, yet we legit have celebrities dressed up playing, embodying superheroes, and none of the companies that actually put out an ad with that person.
Money.
But even still, you pay a little bit of money, and could you imagine there's a new Black Adam comic coming out, and you've got The Rock, and you get Boss Logic to just freaking superimpose that suit, and you're like, oh, you want to know who I'm playing? I'm Dwayne Johnson. Check out this comic coming out. Man, we would probably have thousands of people come and order that. That's how advertising's supposed to work, okay? You need and these people will do it like they love it. You hear these guys talking, Gal Gadot talking about how she loves Wonder Woman. You hear these people talking about how they love the characters. You got, like, look at even the TV show people. If you don't want to use, maybe if you don't want to start with actors, you could start with some of these people who are playing these characters on television. It would help. If they don't think it would help, then they don't know advertising. And it doesn't even matter if it's advertised on the internet or whatever. They just need to make that connection to help drive people to the stores. More people come to the stores, that's more books they're buying. More books they buy or want, more books we order, gets the numbers up. Simple.
You know, can I ask a question? Obviously, I think we can all probably agree, you guys being the retailers would know the best, but that Marvel generally outsells DC.
It does.
Fair? Right. So you know what every Marvel comic has, though? Every Marvel comic has a digital code to redeem the digital version of that book, right? Yeah. Some parents, listen, I grew up at a time where my parents were split up. My dad would get us every Tuesday. That's when comics were released on Tuesdays. He'd buy a stack, a bucket of chicken, and we sit there, and I have greasy comics still from the 80s with all the fingerprints, right? Because we would just keep flopping the comics around. But now you get comics where you can get your parents to buy a comic. They want to read it. Maybe the kid wants to read it on their tablet or whatever at the same time. DC doesn't do that. DC very rarely ever includes a digital code for that book. Mm-hmm. And
to be fair, with their digital service, which is now defunct, so that is now gone.
Yeah,
so maybe
it doesn't. But you can still do it through Comixology.
It was a nice bonus. It's a nice bonus.
It's something. I don't know. It's not fan service, but it's something that it allows. Listen, man, it kills me that my son is not into comics whatsoever, right? And I think he does it to spite me. And if he watches this, I'm gonna kick your ass. But he does it to spite. if you need to pull those kids in, and if that is one of the ways that you can do it, that you have your dad or your mom sitting there reading a comic, a floppy, because we don't like reading on tablets, but kids like reading on tablets, and you got to have that connection.
Yeah, you give them the code.
So, yeah, but I don't think that has anything to realistically do why Marvel is outselling. Marvel.
No, sorry, I just meant I guess in my head I was just saying is that the digital version
added value
of comics it's just that was the only reason it's an extra little special something that it costs nothing.
Yeah, you're paying for the physical and you're getting a free digital. That's pretty cool value.
Yeah.
Right. Yep. So anyways, that's all I was just gonna, because it's just.
So Andre, in your opinion, just quickly before we bounce, Marvel's outside because the story are better, the characters are better. Is like, what is your what is the reason between why Marvel is outselling DC?
I think, unfortunately, I think the reality is that Marvel they just play a better media game. They've had a better media game for years, and even when they, I'm not dissing Marvel, but you asked the question. I think Marvel plays a lot of dirty pool. Mm-hmm. Okay, they love to just take jabs at DC. They love to take they're never gracious. And I think with all the superhero movies and all the cartoons and stuff like that, the Marvel stuff the Marvel brand is stuck. From a
better branding name.
Yeah, I think as an individual who owns a store and is fortunate enough to be able to read all comics, it's not a question of one company having better creators than the other. It's definitely not true, because most creators will do 2 or 3 years at one company and then go over to the next. I don't think either company has better characters than the other. I will say over the past several years, I have enjoyed DC Comics way more than Marvel Comics. Mm-hmm. I believe that their storytelling of late has been better. Not to say Marvel's had bad stuff, like Doctor Strange has been one of, love that book. Right now Donny Cates is hot. I just think that there's something out there, not to use a derogatory term, but people are the Marvel zombies, and there's people that just consume everything Marvel, right? And that's great, but I do believe that the companies now, the parent companies that now own both Marvel and DC, has changed the landscape for what comics can do. I don't think comics have the independent freedom to take characters where they want to anymore, and to do things, as freely. Like everybody now answers to somebody above them, where before, if you had an idea and you took it to the editor of DC, you got okay. Now that editor might be like, we can't tell a story where, Batman has an affair on a married Catwoman or whatever. There's certain things that you can't do. You don't want to tarnish those characters. And I think that's why we are ultimately going to see a change, and have been seeing a change in the comics that we're getting, and the comics that we're going to get going forward. People got to understand, this isn't just going to be a DC problem. We are going to see a lot of stuff at Marvel as well. There's going to be layoffs. There's going to be books canceled. For example, the Empire series that Marvel's been putting out this summer, it's been great, but they canceled 21 tie-in books. They're still publishing a ton, but I think they went from 80 total books down to 60. So this going forward, the pandemic situation has changed the landscape, and we just have to be aware of it. And also, as fans of comics, again, we got to put our money where our mouth is. If you were buying a book digitally, but you want that book to continue, maybe you consider physical. You also might want to consider finding a brick and mortar store to buy from, to support, because a lot of businesses are going to go out of business. A lot of businesses are going to close. And if enough comic shops close and those orders drop even more, those total order numbers, like Rob just said, 3 Jokers had ordered 3 million copies or something?
300,000 of issue number 1.
But that's with Jeff Johns, Jason Fabok, and about 30 covers, right? That's not sustainable. So if you have an average comic book that's now going to be selling 20,000 copies or whatever, and then a lot of stores close down and those orders don't come in, you say goodbye to that book. I don't care whose book it is. It could be Deadpool and His Amazing Friends. And if every month it's not even selling 15,000 copies, it's going to be on the chopping block. These businesses have to start, being the product coming out is accountable to somebody now. It just is accountable to the store. Hey, if a comic does not sell for me, I can't put it on my shelf. Doesn't matter who's doing it. If I don't sell those copies in a month and the next month it's the same thing, that third month I've cut that title. Yeah. Right. We have to stay afloat.
Yeah. So needless to say, the layoffs at DC were very unfortunate. We feel for all those involved. And the media's changed, just because you're an exec there, you may not get another job even close to this at the same pay ever again. So it's happening all across the board. It's not great because it does affect the whole industry at large, because again, if that's happening at DC, then it'll happen at Marvel and maybe Image. All of them will adjust accordingly. It may lead to less pay for writers, artists, everyone involved. And that sucks because again, when having two strong companies, it pits each other to, be better and also pay better. And if it continues to degrade, then also it will affect people's livelihoods as well on different levels. So I hope that this doesn't really, crush everyone as a whole. But from an executive standpoint, unfortunately, when you make that much money at the top, you're often the first ones to go.
This isn't the first time this happened either, right? We have to remember that, right? 78 was the DC implosion, and they chopped all but 6 books.
And Andre talked before, Marvel's done it before, but when they were almost bankrupt and when they tried to sell everything to Sony, and Sony's like, we'll just take Spider-Man, you can keep the rest of that garbage. So I'm sure Sony, if they could do it again, would be like, yes, we'll take everything. But there was a time when they're like, oh, we just want Spider-Man. Don't worry about it. All that X-Men garbage, you keep that. So that's the thing. So we're going to wrap it up because, again, this is, I'm sure we'll have another retailer corner to talk about the upcoming changes. And we'll try to do this segment a little bit more from John and Andre's perspective as store owners and someone who has operated or worked in a comic book store for over 19 years, almost 20 at Heroes World. So John and Andre, where can people find more of you guys online at this standpoint?
Yeah, so the website heroesworldonline.com. We do have the Facebook if you search Heroes World Online, and the YouTube channel, which you're probably watching this on or listening to this. Just search Heroes World Online. And then on the podcast should be on all major podcast services.
Yep. Andre?
Our brick and mortar store is Heroes World, and we are just outside of the GTA, Greater Toronto area. We're in Markham, Ontario, 8601 Warden Avenue. And we carry all the cool stuff we talked about and more, so we carry comic books, trade paperbacks, action figures, statues, artwork, board games, miniatures games, you name it, we've got it, some apparel and stuff. And we just love what we do, what we carry. So we are big supporters of DC. DC's had our back since we opened, quite literally. I'll get into that story another time, but they're going to survive. 100%. Jim Lee said it best. He's like, hey, they're still in the business of publishing comics, so they just have to find the proper footing in order to do that going forward post 2020 and stuff. So we're going to stand with them. We're going to do what we can to keep on supporting them so that you guys can get your fix when you need it.
Rob, where can you find you?
Online, Instagram and Twitter is at Rob Gaudette. And listen, I'm just going to say, when Andre talks about this stuff, and if you're like me, you're just an average dude who likes comics and stuff, and you're listening to what Andre is saying, and it's passion, and it kind of gets you, you want to keep having these conversations. You want to know a little bit inside baseball. I'm going to recommend you calling the store, going in and talking to Andre and John. I'm also going to recommend this book. If anybody has, it's called Slugfest, between Marvel and DC, the 50-year, and a lot of what Andre was saying, you're going to probably find a lot of that as well. And it just gives you a lot of background knowledge of what's been going on. It's fun to know. So you're fun. Yeah.
Let us know whether you like this particular segment. Like, share, subscribe. I think if you guys want more from the perspective of a retailer and more of the, as Rob would say, inside baseball of how things operate, we'll continue to do more of this particular content because John and Andre have a wealth of knowledge and have a history of, you know, and let them even talk about previews and that whole antiquated system of the slog. They have to go through a book and select stuff and all distribution channels. There's a lot more things we can talk about if people really want to know what's going on, because sitting there, it's really interesting to see how they operate that side, because it's also a weird model of how that works as well. So thank you so much for listening. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Comment below and have a good one. Thanks, everyone.
Right. Thank you again, Steve.
Bye.